Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm the Forester of the East, coming to you today from Boise, Idaho, but heading back down to southern Utah this week. October is by far my favorite month of the year. There's something about the transitionary space. I mean, everybody likes the fall colors, and it's stunning here, and it's stunning down there with the aspen trees in southern Utah. But I don't know. I feel like the summertime frenetic energy that's at least normally there in normal years has started to wane, and we're getting into that sort of apex where we shift into the light, turning into the lack of light, into the darkness of the winter solstice. And it feels like it's that where you're crossing that apex, and there's this kind of sweetness of floating in the crispness of the air and the fall harvest and everyone. I feel gratitude is what I feel in this time of year. And I feel that amidst everything that is going on, which is immense. There is so much, as we know. And I hope these conversations and these offerings are helping you. The intention of it is always just to give you different doorways to enter into the inner sanctum of your soul, of your mind, of your heart, and for you to do the listening and the work that you need to do. And I'm here to create different architecture for that to happen, and to have a conversation, this mutual conversation through song, through words, through experiences, as we are waking each other up, and as Ram Dass would say, walking each other home. I did a ceremony concert this last Saturday on October 3rd, 2020, depending on when you're hearing this. That is still on YouTube, and it also streamed to Facebook, the East Forest Music page on Facebook. Same thing on YouTube, East Forest Music. I felt good about it. It was creatively very satisfying, and I felt like I got into some spaces that, some waves that felt really tapped in, which is always a playful space that I like to try and ride those waves when they arrive. I want to thank everyone who showed up. It was, I noticed there's a drop-off since the early March days, and certainly there's been a big drop-off in financial donations that came through. But for those of you who did donate, thank you. It means a lot. This has been a weird time not being able to do or just run the East Forest business. It is a business too. I couldn't do it the way I've been doing it. We couldn't be out there touring, which was at least 50% of my income before. And so this virtual space has its pluses and minuses, but it's been great to be able to do something and connect with you folks around the world, in Japan and Australia, in the U.S. I'm imagining our friends in the U.K. and Europe probably weren't tuned in the middle of the night there, but you got to watch it afterwards, which is awesome. And I do it because of the energetic gift that by giving it, I'm receiving it in the same way. So it's still good. And we're still, I'm still trying to figure these things out as we go week to week, month to month, really, about how we'll continue and in what way, I should say. I'll always continue doing what I do because it's what I do, whether it was a job or not. But I'm so grateful that it is something I can dedicate my life force and time to. So the Spores ceremony is up. So check it out. And speaking of Spores, it started to release. There's going to be another single, Deliquest, coming out this Friday. And then on the 16th, on the new moon, the whole record will be out digitally. But it's already out on vinyl. So many of you have picked up a vinyl. There's only 300 of them. It's awesome. If you'd like to get one of those, hop over to eastforest.org, hit the music tab, and you can order a vinyl. It could also make a great gift if you're an early shopper for the holiday season. Get one while they're still around. I do have one real-world show happening, which is sort of amazing. And it's in Boise, Idaho, where I am, which is awesome. Eric Gilbert hooked me up he's sort of the Tree Fort head and the Duck Club Presents guy. And they're doing this show with Magic Sword at the Botanical Garden. It's outside. It normally holds 3,000 people, but they're going to have it be about 250. So everyone's got their pot of space. So I'm rehearsing for that now because I got to get back in the saddle for playing through big PA front of house sound systems. But I think there might be a couple tickets left. It's definitely selling quickly. So if you're in the area and you feel safe about traveling, or if you're right here, come join us. It could be could be really beautiful. So that's coming up too. This week, I have a conversation with Ted Achacoso, Dr. Ted. He is a brilliant man, literally. When I was meeting him on email, I was learning and informed that he has an incredibly high IQ and has his hands in a lot of different scientific and metaphysical and theoretical pies about wellness and, I mean, really a lot of different subjects. And so he was the type of guest where I didn't actually have to do much prodding to get information out of him. I think I asked one question at the beginning and it was like he was off to the races, and then it was just trying to like steer the ship. But I really like him, and he's very generous with his ideas and his energy. And I think if you pay attention, you're going to pick up on a lot of new information from this, and it's a wonderful ride. So, yeah. Thanks for giving the podcast a review. You can do it now. We're almost up to that 200 mark on iTunes podcast. I'd love to cross over that. It's a wonderful milestone for the podcast, which has been going on now for over 2 years. And I need to do a fresh round of outreach to guests for the show. And so it always helps. It really, really, really helps when you guys review it. So if you want to leave a written review, that's always super awesome too. And to all of our friends on Spotify or Stitcher or wherever else you might be listening to the show, YouTube, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of the community. You can always reach out with questions or say hi at info@eastforest.org, or you can do that on Instagram, East Forest, Facebook, YouTube, all those other things, East Forest Music. All right, folks. I have been, just last thing, just if you wanted little updates on music process, I have been finishing the final mixes to my next studio record, which right now is tentatively titled Possible. And I've been working on this for a long time. It's kind of been 2 years in the making, but pretty intensely in the last 6 months to a year, and recording strings and all sorts of other musicians. I suppose it's my studio follow-up to the Ram Dass record. And it's really, I'm really enjoying it. It's really beautiful. So it's been such a joy to be doing those last mixing and finishing touches. I've been doing it here in Boulder and Boise, and also Boulder, Utah, in the studio down there at the Boulder Mountain Guest Ranch. Shout out to them and thank you. And I can't wait. I'm just really looking to share it with you. So that's probably going to happen, God willing, in the winter. And I think you're going to enjoy it. There's some really interesting soundscapes in there. It's sort of a mixture of ambient pop and post-classical. It's got some words in there, some talkies, as I like to call them, and some instrumental tracks. And it's a nice journey. So we'll be sharing that here and there. But today, you're going to hear a track at the end of this called Always. That's the one that just released on Spotify for the Spores record, and Delaquest comes out this Friday. So let's do this. Let's get into this conversation with our new friend, Dr. Ted. Thanks so much for spending some time with us, and it's a pleasure to meet you. And because I'm meeting you, and I know maybe some of our listeners are too, it might be helpful if we could just start with, if you could give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you're up to, and then I have some questions from there. I'm sure it'll get us into a good conversation.
Yes, if you're looking for academic credentials, that's a little bit long. I was a college graduate at 18 in biology. I was a doctor of medicine at the age of 22. At 25, I was a professor of neurology, interventional neuroradiology, and pharmacology. At 28, I was a professor of medical informatics. And I wrote my first book on the biomathematical modeling of consciousness in the brain when I was 30. And I run my first company on distributed systems when I was 35. And at the time I was asked where health was going to go 10 years from now. And I said it was going to the area of wellness medicine, regenerative medicine, age reversal technologies, and so on. So Um, my research work was in artificial intelligence. So for a while, I traded currencies using artificial intelligence technologies, after running my company. And then I went to Europe for a couple of years and got another double board certification in anti-aging medicine and
Why
nutritional
not?
medicine.
Yeah, yeah.
And and yeah, I told you the academic credentials quite long. And when I was 49, I headed back to Manila, Philippines, and I started a clinical framework for health called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, which is the balancing of the imbalances in within the cell. And it caught on. We're now on our 11th year, and it's become a clinical framework for health management. Um, and instead of just disease management. And one of the things that connects all of those uh, careers, if you can, I have ADHD. I have an ADHD career, as you can see. One of the things that connects those always is the view of network systems, that everything else is interconnected, whether it be in the brain or us in the environment, or the earth in the universe, and so on. And those can be mathematically defined, right? And right now,
Mm-hmm.
I was actually shocked that uh, y- you know I when I was doing this research, we were called connectionist systems or neural networks. And then it was I said, what is this fucking deep learning all about? And deep learning was in fact neural networks. It just had a new name. But one of the things that have always fascinated me, shall I call you Trevor or East or Krishna? uh,
Well, I go by my friends call me Krishna, but East Forest is
yeah,
another name I
Krishna.
have. So pick your moniker. Yeah.
Okay, Krishna is fine. And one of the things, see, when I developed this framework, you detect and correct imbalances inside the cell, right? And they are small molecules called metabolites. It was not possible for us to do that before because we didn't have the technology. But the fundamental idea is that now that we are able to take a look inside the cell, right, and what the cell needs, which is the basis of all the organs in the body, someone's got to take care of the fundamental cell, the one that is the nucleus, mitochondria, cytoplasm, cell membranes, and so on. And in the course, and this is the thing that's interesting to your audience, is that one of the questions that came up that was so difficult to answer was that, okay, you're after balancing the imbalances, so how do you fit this the spiritual health in the health optimization medicine framework? And I thought for a bit, and this was a psychiatrist who has taken, over 100 ayahuasca journeys. And I said, DMT is a spirit molecule, right? And I said, well, then I said, lack of spirituality is lack of DMT. So let's call it DMT deficiency syndrome. So if the person lacks spirituality, just give him some DMT. You're gonna be fine.
Problem solved. Okay.
Yes. And he said, "Oh my God, that's so nice. Can I use that?" He said, "I'm gonna attribute it to you." But it got me into thinking really with a lot of the consciousness research that was done, because when I was first entered the lab of Dr. Yamamoto, who was the founder of the entire field of medical informatics that we have today, right? He asked me two questions. He said, "Is consciousness computable?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "Is beauty computable?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "In this lab, you only get to answer one question." I should have chosen beauty, Krishna, because I would have made a lot of money there and not answer consciousness. But it was really. I said, "What does the body do, particularly the brain, right? Because I used to poke brains for a living, as I like to say. What does it really do, in order to present you with altered states of consciousness? In fact, one of the things I'm doing now is I'm slowly writing a book, right?
Mm-hmm.
To put together a lot of the things that are out there, and sometimes the subject matter is really difficult because some of them are expressed in highly mathematical terms, right? But looking at the whole field right now, there seems to be a confusion on what we call consciousness. I do love Sam Harris, and his waking up
Sure.
app when he goes to his meditation and stuff. But I want to get it on a more neuroscientific footing, right? And there's the work of Carl Friston, who is in the short list of Nobel um, uh, winners. His name has cropped up there. But his work is difficult in a sense that it's highly mathematical and probabilistic. But he's essentially putting out there that there's a model that first you have to prove that you exist, right? So there's a principle for existence before you actually can even discuss what is alive and then what's conscious, right? And so that goes for a lot of things. We usually confuse what's being alive for what's being conscious. But in neuroscientific terms, if we just discuss about human consciousness in general, you see that there is a phenomenon called wakefulness. You're either awake or asleep, or you're anesthetized or not. And that's the wakefulness definition of consciousness, right? So, and then you move up a one level, and there's what's called the alert model is awake, and then you have the alert model, meaning it's exteroceptive, meaning you're using your senses, and it's the basis of mindfulness. For example, when you're looking
Yeah.
around and you're not processing anything inside, that's exteroceptive type, and that's being alert, right? And the last level is being able to have ideas, right, and thoughts, and so on, and being able to observe those, and that is a process of abstraction. So that's a neat model that's out there that makes a lot of sense. But in terms of us decreasing suffering, which is what we would like to do, right? If you look at my mission for my company, Smarter Not Harder, it's to decrease suffering in myself, and to decrease suffering in the world, in others, knowing that there is no other, right? So what do I mean by that, and why is it such an emergency, right, to decrease suffering in oneself? And the Buddha is right in saying that the attachment and is the root of suffering, is aside from ignorance, right, is the root of suffering. And what is it that attaches? And it's the ego, right, or the egoic sense of self. But we know neuroscientifically now that the sense of self, or I don't like to use ego a lot because people don't really know what it means. It's very Freudian. Ego for them means is one sense of self-importance. So I'd like to use the
Yeah.
term self-referential system instead, right? Your sense of autobiography and so on. And there are structures in the brain called the default mode network, right? That actually is the default mode when you are ruminating. Like many depressed people have hyperactive default mode networks, and these are large neural tracts in the brain, and it's already been mapped out. It was accidentally discovered around 2002, right? And it has been shown now with the work of Robin Carhart Harris and other people, that actually there is a decreased blood flow to the default mode network when you're under psilocybin. right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's the opposite to the default mode network, which is towards the central brain structures. If you take a look at the peripheral brain structures, if you like to visualize it that way, then you have what's called the task positive network, or that which is engaged when you're looking outwards. If you're, for example, comparing it to the flow activities that people describe, right? When you're actually, before, when I was doing surgery, you would be focused outside or external. And that's because they're counter switched. When the task positive network is on, the default mode network is off, right? And what I've seen a lot of the psychedelics do, like, if, for example, the DMT in ayahuasca, right? And LSD, for example, and psilocybin, is that they actually shut off the default mode network. In other words, the way I describe it to people is just like, if you're a bodybuilder and you take steroids, right? You basically still have to do the work, but it helps you, right? And this is like, these psychedelics are like the steroids for your mental gym. It allows you to see the illusoriness of the self. So it shows that the self, or the egoic self, is just really an illusion that comes up. And one of the skills that you really do, see, I'm removing as much mysticism as possible for people to get more engaged, in these types of a mental gym, for them to be able to develop not only their physical selves, but to shape their mental lives such that they are not suffering, right?
Well,
Because
if
the
I could
ego
ask
is the
you
one.
a clarifying
Go ahead.
question on what you just said, when you say it being an illusion, would maybe another way of looking at that being like, it's not that it's illusion, it's more just sort of one of the layers that's obfuscating and totally covering up what else is there that you're not able to sense. Because the
Um,
egoic sense, you're saying the fact that we have an ego and the role it plays is a pattern of neural pathways. It's a thing. It's there for us, but a lot
uh,
of us are just sort of stuck there.
I think that's because of your definition of the word illusion. See,
Uh-huh.
illusion does not mean that it's not there. Illusion simply means it's not what it seems to be, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So
That's interesting.
so with that kind of definition, so you have to keep that definition in your head. When someone says illusion, you immediately think it's not true or it does not exist. It's not so. The word illusion means it's not what it seems to be, right? It only is it's not actually the central controller of things. It only seems like it's a central controller of things, because when all of those are activated, like your medial prefrontal cortex, for example, or posterior cingulate cortex, when all of these things are activated all at the same time, then you know that the default mode network is up, and it seems that there is a central conductor, or something that limits all of the things that are outside you in order for you to be functioning here. It has an evolutionary purpose. Don't get me
Sure.
wrong. And the way Ram Dass puts this really is, we have to recognize the ego is really just a series of roles that we take, right? I'm the interviewee now of Krishna, and I'm a doctor later, I'm a teacher later, and so on. And it's a series of roles. And he has in one of his lectures, he actually says, you take your roles lightly, right? You dance with your roles lightly, because it's not you, or it's not your identity. And many of us mistake that for our identity, right? Instead of being the pure awareness that we are, and so on. We essentially, the way for those people who have experienced lucid dreaming, when you wake up in your dream, it's the same feeling that you get when you lose the sense of self, or the ego, is something like lucid living. You wake up and realize that you are in a dream. Leo Hartong actually wrote a book called Lucid Living, and it's actually very apt because it's basically you're basically transposing a lucid dream experience to a lucid living experience, and it's a different experience altogether, right? And the skill that you are able to get, like for example, you use psychedelics in order to if you haven't experienced what it is to lose one's ego or oneself, then you take a high dose of psychedelics, right? Somewhere in a country where it's legal, and someone who knows what he's doing, right? And when you do that, you will experience what's called an ego dissolution, right? Whether you take ayahuasca or you take psilocybin, you will experience ego dissolution. Now, the key there is to bring back that experience, and actually remember it such that when you're doing your meditation, you're able to actively become aware of when your ego begins to arise. And it's really very simple. People think that's a complex thing, and I tell them it's a skill, right? It's really very easy. When your attention gets hijacked by a thought or an emotion, that's it. You're fucked. Your ego is already there, right? Because you're fully engrossed. And the example that Sam Harris gave, which is really very apt, is he said, you meet a friend and he says to you, "I can't believe you did that to me," and at that moment you get, what did I do to you? You become immediately sucked up by the egoic response, right? But someone who's trained will actually see the ego arise, or the illusion actually come up, right? And actually posit a non-reactive response, or a more
Witness.
responsive response. Yes, yeah. But you must realize that the content of your consciousness and the witness are one and the same, right? And that's the basis for a non-dual practice in meditation.
Yes.
You must realize that, I know that people like to do the ocean to the wave type of metaphor, right? For this, the waves are your thoughts, emotions, etc. And sometimes you think you're the wave, but I'm a more of a three-dimensional thinker when it comes to these things. And that a tornado is actually made up of the same air that's around it, right? It's just all of these vortices that are spinning. So you could just imagine all these thoughts and emotions, etc., are just vortices, right there. And they just, when they all aggregate, and you have the huge vortex, and suddenly that vortex is simply you. You're the tornado right there who's getting angry at everyone else, without any observation of what's going on.
And how do people disidentify with, if they are those constituent parts of the air of the tornado that they're identified with? What are techniques that you can use to disidentify, to get more into that plenum state of awareness, the larger state of our being?
As I said earlier, they can get into a guided psychedelic experience, right? They can get into a guided psychedelic experience, so they can have during the post processing, they could actually identify at which point the ego just acquiesce and say, I'm not controlling this fucking thing anymore, right?
But they learn that lesson. But I mean, like in the day to day, a lot of us, because a lot of people listening to this, they have a lot of skills, they have psychedelic experiences, but they're like, look, this is a tough time right now. So it's like, how do I deal with these extenuating circumstances?
And that's where your daily practice of meditation comes, right? Because when you have a formal practice of sitting, but at the same time, your whole day becomes a meditative state, right? And that's these are the people mistake like mindfulness and meditation to be one and the same, but no, mindfulness is basically a technique that allows you to shut down the default mode network, right? To do something that's more externally focused, like you give your attention an anchor, like your breath, or when you are, you're noticing, for example, things that you don't normally notice. like you are wearing clothes, or you start feeling things that are external to you, and suddenly you are not thinking, right? And these are just little exercises that you can do during the day. What I tell people that I teach is that, why don't you just give yourself 3 deep breaths before starting any other activity, and just for those few seconds. Um, um, I actually like the also the another uh, analogy that was given by Sam Harris on how superficial this state is. It's not a deep thing, right? For us to be able to do this, most people think it's something deep that you have to practice 30 years, etc., etc. In
Right.
fact,
Yes.
it's just like the blind spot, right, in your optic nerves. If you've tried that exercise, you will see that in your retina there's actually where the optic nerve actually it comes out and goes out to the brain. There's no retina there, and you can actually find that out by this test with two crosses on paper with a certain distance towards your face. You will see them disappear. It's because there's no retina there, right? And it's the same thing with the ego, right? Most people think that it's hard to do, but really it's an the metaphor that I like that Sam Harris gave is that, say you're sitting on a train, right, and all your life you're just looking outwards, at the view, etc. But at some point in time, with the proper lighting and the proper angle, of your looking out, you will see a reflection of your face, right? And that's your ego. It's like it's it's very superficial, right? And so the shift, for me, it's there's a book by Adyashanti, right? I think it's called Shift into Freedom or Shift into Joy or something like that. But it's a shift in the way you become aware of things, right? It's not exactly a perspective shift, but a shift in awareness. You are aware that what you're seeing, what you're hearing, is occurring in the same space as where your thoughts are arising, as where your emotions are arising, and where your speech is coming from, and so on. They just form one sphere of awareness that's just all there. And these little exercises of just calming yourself down, putting yourself in parasympathetic mode, would help that. Another way of doing it, Krishna, I don't know whether or not you have done this practice, is to microdose your psilocybin, right?
Yeah, I've tried all
Um,
sorts of things.
yeah,
Yeah.
microdose your psilocybin or microdose your LSD, right? And you will see that during the day, you're a little bit more selfless, right? There's a lot more creative ideas because the task positive network, or the parts of the brain that don't normally communicate, are communicating, right?
What
And
role does that play in health? Because you mentioned that at the beginning, like how our health is connected to these states of mind and the choices we
yeah,
make to create them.
yeah. Much of what we have developed as a world is a parasympathetic world. It's a go, 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 artificial light, electromagnetic frequencies, all of these kinds of things that we have developed. It's a go, go, go type of world. But more insidious, and I think more sinister than that, is that we have created a world that actually has glorified the satisfaction of the ego, right? You created Facebook and Instagram, etc., and people like you, and so on and so forth, and you have your
Yeah.
followers, and then you begin to have the egoic external validation of all of these things, right? So that kind of world is suddenly, if your habit is actually looking at your feed in the morning, and people didn't like what you said, your day will be fucked, right? I say in just in a practical way, right? um, so so you see that this world that we've created is like that. So the way I look at it is that if you are able, so what is it that's in you that is suffering, right? What is it in you that actually is suffering? So there's a saying, right? Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So the suffering
Right.
happens when someone owns the pain, right? When someone owns the pain, then someone is suffering. But if the pain just arises, in that sphere of awareness, then it's just pain that's arising, right? So you can be in equanimity despite being in physical pain, right? So the ego is the one that does all the want. Like I want this, and therefore, and that's why I say there's an emergency for us to be able to do this. It's because it's the ego that wants more profits, and therefore I will pollute the oceans more, and it's the ego that wants more profit, and therefore I shall use child labor. It's the ego that wants more, so you don't have time to spend with your kids, and really spend quality time with people that you love and who matter to you. It's because of that egoic want that drives you, right? And what does that do to your health? It just drives you to more to sympathetic overdrive, right? You're never able to relax because it always wants more, and more. And if we are able to say, well, okay, here it is that illusory part of you that has all the wants. Is the experience collector. I want more of this and more of that and more of that, right? And if you're able to put that out, then it becomes less reactive, right? It becomes more responsive rather than reactive. So instead of you didn't get the contract, that contract would have bought you the car that you wanted, and so on, right? And you get absolutely stressed out. You've worked for that contract, and so on and so forth. But if you see that, what is it in there in your system that's really doing the wanting, right? What is it that's actually attaching to all of these things? And you can see that it's just another arising in your consciousness, and therefore you begin to say, okay, there's the desire. I could see it and identify it, but it's not me. And when you do that, then you begin to relax to what is. I mean, Ram Dass was big into
Yeah.
relaxing into what is, right? And it's not just about present moment awareness, but it's relaxing to what is. Everything that is around you, you relax to it, because these are all, as I like to say, everything that we see around us, everything that we hear, these are illusions anyway, right? They are reconstructed by our brains. They are reconstructed by our brains and presented to us. Whatever is out there is however they are. It just looks at it just looks to us that way because that's how our senses afford us to look at them, right? And all of these other circuits and structures in the brain, this is what they give us. And this is sort of like, the word that has been abused is qualia. This is, your subjective sense of experience of things, right? So that's the reason how these things affect health, right? Then suddenly you are able to see who is getting stressed. Is not your real identity. Who is getting stressed is actually your egoic self. And then if you realize that that's illusory, then you could actually change the way you are actually, instead of reacting to the environment, you respond to the environment. And then your sympathetic overdrive dies down. And it's better for you because your stress hormones are not kicked up in a chronic way, and you won't have chronic inflammation, and you will not
Yeah.
be prone to chronic diseases, right?
Yeah,
So
the egoic self is part of this spacesuit we're in, and I can see how it can have a deleterious effect on our health because of that sense of desire. But I also want to ask you, because I think sometimes desire itself in some ways is the engine that keeps a lot of it moving forward. The idea of progress and growth, the soul's journey and growing on some level is tied to that desire to return to God, for, I'm just going to use that phrase, or that desire
Y-
for anything, just saying I could do better, I could give more, even I could serve better, even as a form of desire that serves a role.
Yes. Yes. And this is what I wanna remove from your listeners' consciousness. It's not desire that's the root of suffering. It's attachment to the desire. It's all right to desire, but being attached to the results of what you desire will fuck you up, right? Your desire can be the source of your motivation and so on and so forth. But if you get attaching yourself to the results, you will begin to suffer, right?
The fruits
Look,
versus the labor. Yeah. Yeah.
yes. So look, I started health optimization and practice 11 years ago, right? And I was trying to tell the illness medicine community, hey, you're after diagnosing and treating disease, but how can we take a look at health, right? It's just like you have a car and all we know to do is actually to change your flat tire or to cool your engine, right? We're always diagnosing and treating disease, but who is doing the car maintenance? Who tops off the oil and who basically equalizes the pressure of your tires, and
Mm-hmm.
and so on. The technology then did not exist, right? But now we do have the technology. But look, it still took a long time, for something like this to actually mature, into what we have today, because it requires a shift, essentially, in a perspective. So when you are talking about a group of people that were trying to explain what this is, right? At first, you have to make it easy, and you make a clear cut case that there's a need for it, right? And and in the case of being able to uh, 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 be unreactive and more responsive to your environment and so on, that also requires practice, right? It requires practice.
Yeah.
And what
Sure.
what yeah, and what practices can you do? Right, the practices that you can do, of course, are meditation, mindfulness, breathing, and so on. And you can take substances that can help you do that, like microdosing, hallucinogens and entheogens and so forth. But it has its own structure, right? It has its own structure that can be presented. I think we are burdened, Krishna, by a lot of there's nothing wrong with mystical stories about things, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes it becomes an impediment, to be able to present your case, right? Like for me, those who are trained only in disease oriented medicine, never see the point that, disease is it's not one day your blood sugar goes over 94 and you're already diabetic. It's a spectrum that actually leads us to that thing. It's the same thing as being able to observe your ego or decrease your suffering, right? And decrease your reactivity and so forth. It's it's a lot of ingrained ways of doing things that our mind does, right? So we identify what our mind does. We know that people have already won Nobel awards for seeing how terrible the mind does at estimating probabilities and so on. We know that, and it is building on that. And when we make decisions and so forth, it's what we're doing here is making ourselves aware that this is how we're programmed, right? This is how the brain is programmed. And being able to see clearly how the brain is programmed will then allow us make better decisions about how we respond, about how we treat others, about how we how we engage in the world. I don't like the term, when people say I hate myself, I don't love myself enough, and I ask those people, exactly what self is there, right? Uh, exactly what is that self, and that is the egoic self. That's right there, right? And so you have. That's why it is described as an expanded consciousness, right? When you're able to go beyond and see beyond the veil, or the veil of the ego, or to pierce the veil, as they say, is to pierce the veil of the ego, right? Is to be able to look beyond that and see that it's that which has prevented you from seeing all along. And it's not, it's not like you are going to get this overnight. It's just like any other practice of a skill. You have to do it every day, and
Of
every
course,
moment
yeah.
that you have, and so on, and until it becomes integrated into your life. One of the things that you can do, for your listeners, is one of the things that you can do is, when someone asks you the question before, no matter how mundane or how difficult the question is, before answering the question, just ask yourself a simple question, just automatically, like, who's really answering this question? And then it will
I like that.
basically, but yeah, put a lot of things in context. And it's what I say, to my students, is that if there's a who in there, you know that the ego is up, right? If there's a who in there, you know that the ego is up. It's not bad to have the illusion of the ego. As I said, they're important for the roles that you take, but you must realize that they are roles that you take, right? You are expected to behave one way as a doctor, you are expected to be one way as a teacher, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's not you, you know. And that's the beauty of the whole exercise, is that you're not identified with any one of your roles. Yeah, you do your roles with your expertise, right? And so forth. But at the end of the day, it's really just one of your roles, and you're aware that you are actually playing those roles, right?
In a play.
In the grand scheme of
Yeah.
things.
I want to go back to, you brought up at the very beginning some work you've done with AI, and it made me. I had this discussion with my partner the other day, and we were thinking about social media and the way that algorithms are creating further and further focusing of reality tunnels of what we see and what we learn, and how that actually shifts our concepts of who we think we are. Like, we actually think we're making the choices, but we've actually started to program ourselves through this algorithm that's getting us to start to believe other things and make different kinds of choices. And then we start to see increased polarization in our society. And it made me think about, people say with AI about a singularity where, there'll be this point where there's this consciousness that arises. And I started to think, like, what if it's already here? It's in all these different algorithms that are learning and learning, and they're getting closer and closer to starting to actually create, like, we're being influenced already. We know this, but a lot of us aren't very awakened to it, the effect it's having on society. And it's like a snake eating its own tail that we've created. Like, that the AI that we've created and how it works in social media is changing the way we think without people really accepting what it's doing to us.
Um,
If,
I have the opposite point of view to that. It's sort of like opposite, right? For someone who, and this is coming in from my point of view from cognitive neuroscience. I spent 7 years in a cognitive neuroscience lab. Our brain is actually wired for stories, for conspiracy theories. It's wired for that because it's evolutionarily advantageous for us, right? A lot of our biases, a lot of the heuristics or the shortcuts that we use in thinking are there because they allowed us to survive and reproduce as a species. Okay, so that's the evolutionary point of view of those. What is essentially nefarious that's happening now is that the people in social media do not know that this very same mechanisms that have been put in there by evolution, including social altruism and all of those kinds of things. Uh, all of those had been placed by evolution because they have some evolutionary value for we that adapted us for survival and production. The nefarious thing about it is that we are exploiting those very same mechanisms to change the minds of people without them knowing it. So the mechanisms for manipulation are already there, right? It's just being exploited by AI. Right? It's just being exploited by AI. So we know, all of these things are already have already been studied, right? And as I said earlier, Nobel Prizes have been given for them, but the public doesn't know, right? It's not in general information and so forth. If you are not, for example, a student of evolutionary psychology or evolutionary biology or game theory for that matter. But all of these mechanisms are in place, and all AI is doing is exploiting those mechanisms within us, right? Exploit. So in effect, we are actually being pushed down to, in the words that you're using, a lower form of consciousness or a lower form of awareness, right? Because now you are the simple way to remember this is that this is how our brains work. Basically, according to Kahneman, right? There's a system one, where you're thirsty and you're going to look for a drink, right? And system two would say a thirst for justice. So you see how these two systems are actually overlaid with the way we're thinking. But these are evolutionarily and socioculturally evolved right within us. And so what we're doing now is we're actually, for example, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there because as a group, as a group of humans, we actually stayed coherent because it is better to believe in a story, that would either harm us or kill us, even if it's not true, right? Rather than not believe the story at all. So these things are actually built into us, and where it's just being exploited by all of these systems. So for me, it's not the AI that's doing it. It's actually how we're using the AI to use system one, which is our bioevolutionary programming that is intended for other things, right? Intended for our survival and production. Now, how is it then how can we do this then such that we are able to identify that we are actually exploited or being manipulated by actually being able to shift consciousness, right? Give another perspective, give another way of looking at things, or give a way of questioning what's arising in one's mind, right? Give a person a way of questioning what's arising in his mind. Is because we have a lot of one of the jokes that I like is my partner's favorite hobbies are uh, my partner's favorite position is being beside herself, and her favorite sport is jumping into conclusions. So and and that just shows you that these are the default ways by which evolution has wired us, right? So how can we, in order to activate system two, right, we need a lot of education to teach people what is statistics, what's probability, because it's rational thought. It requires more energy, and that's why we default to that default system that jumps into conclusions right away, right? And when we feed via Twitter feeds and Instagram feeds, etc., all of this false information and so on and so forth. It's gonna take it at face value, right? Because that's what it does. And you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. That's also known in cognitive neuroscience. So how can we then help exercise, and as to use the words earlier, a witness? How can we provide a witnessing awareness, to what's happening in your mind, that you are actually, not being manipulated by all of these pieces of information that's going outside, right? Um, because the AI systems that we're developing, sometimes we don't know. In fact, oftentimes now, because of the way they adjust themselves automatically when they learn, we don't know what they're doing anymore. Right. I was involved, for example, with in very early AI, some 28 years ago, where I was developing, I was doing the coding for detecting the edges. It's edge detection, right? And this was in the liver. When you were getting an MRI, for example, how do you detect the liver, and the capsule of the liver from the peritoneum, which is the inner lining of the abdomen? You have to make the distinction, and there is you have to do it mathematically, right? The algorithm has to separate that. 28 years later, I wrote that algorithm, and 28 years later, you find that same algorithm being used now for facial recognition systems, and things like that. So that kind of discrimination that's being used in artificial intelligence is really born of all of these other things that we needed to do, right? And now, what they're doing with AI, for example, in changing your mind about the way you vote, is that there is a way to track your behavior, right? There's a way to track your behavior such that it shows that you are potentially persuadable. You are a persuadable voter. Something, or you're persuadable to use a certain product over another, and so on. So you're targeted because there's a lot of data points around you and how you move, and therefore they will target you then with all of this information or misinformation and messages that will move you to vote one way or the other. Now, remember that there are already studies that show that if for example, if your amygdala, where the fear is generated in the brain, right? Is activated, right? That's where you pass a lot of things, like, because you basically clear out a lot of things with that system. Like, is this friend or foe? Am I going to die because of this or not? It's very instant that we have that fear response, right? No matter how much it's expressed, right? And they've already shown that if you have a bigger amygdala and you're more sensitive to all of this sudden sounds, and you're easily surprisable and fearful of things, then you're likely to vote more conservatively. So the structure of your brain, you don't even know it, right? And this is what I'm saying, you don't even know it, that you might think that you are voting because you have decided on some things already, right? Or
Yes,
you
that's my
are
point.
deciding on
Yeah.
a product. Yeah, you're deciding on a product because you're basically being rational about it. But there are certain things with the way the brain functions and the brain works, that uh, that actually subconsciously, or even the better term is unconsciously, has actually led you to that same conclusion, right? To the same conclusion, but what your ego is thinking is like, no, I made that decision, and
Exactly.
this is, yeah, and this is very clear. I don't know whether or not you're aware of Libet's experiments, where he tested for, I'm now going to reach for this glass of water, and you're going to indicate when you are actually willed to reach for the glass of water. And he found out that there was about 350 milliseconds before that your neurons are already firing before you even decided you're going to get the glass of water. So there's an internal processing that are going on, and the consciousness or awareness that you have is already late, right? And for me, it's the same thing as, when you are a batter, for example. There's a reason why you practice and practice, because there's a lag between the time that the ball is flying and you are positioning your hand for the bat, and so on and so forth. The brain likes to minimize its error. So you practice and practice and practice until you actually get it right. But there is, according to the computation of an Italian group, in fact, a 7-second delay. My own computation in the 1990s was a 2 pi seconds, right? Delay from the time that you are actually become aware that you're going to do something, that you are going to will something to happen, right? So what does that mean for us? It means that when you are doing a meditation practice, or when you are doing a mindfulness practice and so on, it is possible, to to sink into that awareness where as the desire, as you said, arises to reach for the glass of water, you already feel the desire come up, right? Because it's a state, right? Before it's actively presented, I'm going to reach for the glass of water. It is possible to train yourself to become sensitive to that unconscious space, right? And that's the goal. For me, in a practical sense, when you're looking at it in a neuroscientific way, that's the goal of practicing the skill. It's so that you are not reactive before you even blurt out, you're a piece of shit, or Dr. Ted, what you're saying is shit. Before you even say that, you already feel it arise within you before you actually blurt it out. And that's the skill that you develop with meditation, with mindfulness, and so on. And that skill actually serves to decrease your stress levels, and therefore will probably stave off a lot of your chronic diseases, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you, as we're rounding the corner here, are you personally hopeful? Are you optimistic about humanity's direction and how we're trying to thread the needle that we're going through right now, these intense transitions and change and growth point that we're at as a civilization, particularly in the West?
This is the way I view it, Krishna, really. Any transition that either has excellent or disastrous results is going to be very tumultuous. It's just like the way you can take a look at it is the phase transition of water to steam, right? The water will have to boil, and then it comes out as steam. And so we are transitioning, and at any transition point, at any period of change or transition point, is going to be very tumultuous. However, this is especially a tumultuous time for us because this is the first time that we're actually experiencing the effects of extreme connectedness, right? Extreme connectedness with the targeting of our biases and prejudices by the information. So this is a big, I like to think of it that this is the big human experiment that has never been done. And we are doing it to ourselves. And you're seeing the massive polarization. And for me, this massive polarization is not the driving force. The massive polarization is an effect of what we have done, right? It's an effect of what we have done. And so you could see that it's basically highly correlated in terms of human behavior, right? It's highly correlated in terms of how human beings decide and so on. And here's the thing: why there's I hesitate to answer hopeful or not hopeful, or optimist or not optimist to your question, is because we also have this bias that a lot of people think like us, right? We have this thing, right? Oh, my side is going to win because there are many people out there who think like me but do not speak aloud, right? uh, and that's built into us. Uh, there's an this was what's called an in-group out-group bias. That's built into us, and that's why I was saying earlier that it really behooves us to study how we're wired and how we behave alone or in groups, evolutionarily, and how we make decisions, because that's what's getting exploited right now. So we, much as what we have done here is exploit basically a lot of emotional buttons, right? A lot of emotional buttons that is really push button for, because emotions are the ones that push you to vote. Emotions are the ones that push you to move you to, is emovere, right? To move, to do certain things. It's harder to take a look. It's easier to take a look at yourself and of your family and of your loved ones, and it's like that's me. You're right. It's a more selfish position to retain my job, to do this, just for my church group and so on, and it takes another level altogether to think of society as a whole and what's good for it, to shelter the homeless, to feed the hungry and so on. That's another level of consciousness altogether. And then it takes another level of consciousness to say, hey, this is our one and only planet at the moment that is our home. Here's where we are as human beings. We're only one species on Earth, right? And what's our place among the species? We're destroying, a lot of our habitat, our organic spaceship. We're basically destroying it very rapidly, and that takes a different form of consciousness, right? So you begin by a certain sense of selfishness, you expand it to the society as a whole, and then you expand it to the world as a whole. And my question then, in terms of answering that question, is really, if I attempt to answer the question, where are we in terms of expanding that consciousness, right? Where are we in terms of expanding that consciousness? If we continue only doing things that are good for us but are not good for everyone else, um, and if that's the majority of us, what hope does the species have, right, for the future? So, in terms of that, I am nervous. Is my answer? I am nervous as to what is going to happen, right? Because either way, either it becomes, an expanded consciousness, or it becomes a contracted consciousness. There is going to be a massive unrest among people, right? There's going to be this anxiety. And as you know, since 4 years ago, the number of prescriptions for anti-anxiety drugs has increased and still increasing in the United States. But my point is that whichever way the phase transition goes, there will be unrest either way. So I think the big thing, Krishna, that it really resonates with me in terms of all of these things that we're talking about is how connected we are, not only to each other, really connected to other species, connected to the earth, and connected to the universe that we're in, right? And so when are we going to have a consciousness that expands that network from just our own, or even just our own species? Right now, if you belong to another country, you're not human. So it's kind of
Easier than that, yeah.
that's very bothersome for me, right? That's very bothersome for me, because where is the expansion of consciousness that we wished we had, right? And so people like you and other people, you try to do this, right? You try to expand other people's consciousness. You you try to or you develop music that can hopefully do the same things that psychedelics can probably do, to expand your consciousness, feel your oneness with the universe, and so on and so forth. We need more of this, right? We need more of these kinds of things that make us feel, the thing that I like to remind myself every morning when what I call the history of the universe meditation, how to meditation, is I imagine, nothingness, then the big bang, and then the evolution of the galaxies, etc., and then the solar system, and then the earth, and then the evolution of life, on earth, and then there's man, and then there's me, and it's like, what problem do I have? Right? I really don't have any problem when you always remind yourself of that point of view. And we don't have that point of view right now, which is scary, right? We
Yeah.
don't, and that's what's scary, is we can't pull back and see. It's because everyone's self-referential system or egoic self is actually the identity. Is his identity, right? Your political grouping becomes your identity. Your choice to follow someone or someone else becomes part of your identity, and so on. And with the way we're giving feedback, right? The dopamine hits that we're giving each person, we're actually strengthening that egoic power of people. So I'm wondering if there's any other way, by which we could actually, you know, allow these people to see more of, hey, really, all of this, take a look at how all of these advertisements on TV are manipulating you, right? um
Yes, it's important.
yeah, and the biggest thing right now for me, my biggest issue at this time, is actually how misinformation, um uh because they trigger in you certain emotional states, etc., how misinformation actually misguides you, right? Because I receive, a lot of misinformation, and I'm really hated by groups that I belong to, because I always put out a fact checked. Someone puts in, oh, this thing happened and so, and there's this fact check that I just put. I don't say anything, right? And people still hate me. So for doing that, but and that's the kind of vigilance I think that we need to exert at this time. Um, at these times of transition, right? For your life, even in your life, when you are transitioning, say, from one career to the other, or you are transitioning from one state to the other. You used to be young, and now you realize, that you're actually already old, and so on and so forth. There is this period of instability, and that's the reason why they call it a midlife crisis, and so on. And the transitional phase is something like that. So I don't expect us to, whether or not something is decided one way or the other, Krishna, I don't think we're gonna stabilize very quickly. There is that
Yes.
period of tumult that's gonna come up, however
Mm.
the coin goes.
Mm.
uh, you know that's just how
Well,
I see
thank you.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's a very it's a great answer. I mean, we're getting to the point where we're going to need to close based on time, but I don't want to leave people to say with the feeling of just tumult. But I know what you're saying. It's like growth is just that. It's over time, and it's you're. I think you're also putting forth a message that we have the ability to strengthen these muscles of awareness and that witness, so that we can see these things and catch these things and grow and be able to be more acting as an agent of our full being, instead of just the ego and the surface levels of who we think we maybe are. And I think a lot of people are growing into that. Many people on this planet, as we meet these folks, it's just sometimes that the people who have a lot of the power maybe aren't, and it might feel like it's everybody, but it's sometimes like the powers that be are driven so strongly by those egoic concerns that it can take over and feel like it's the whole planet.
Yeah, and the one thing that I actually noticed that drives also a lot of the misinformation that the ego feeds on is that much of the data that are out there that are being put out, or much of the information, are taken out of context, right?
Right.
The especially the younger ones, the younger generation, they don't bother to read the original sources of where the information comes from,
Well, they don't trust
right?
it even. They'll say, even if
Like
I
they,
did, they'll say it's not true or it's
yeah.
not, it's fake.
Yeah, for example, they would adopt the whole lifestyle of Stoicism. And I said, have you actually read about Stoicism? Where did it come from? Why was it? And what's the cognitive bias that's actually active in Stoicism? And there are all of these things that because of Twitter and its bite-sized chunks of information, we lose the context of a lot of things. You know, just like today, I sent out to a group of people that I was teaching. I said, I hope you learned about Albert Camus and the myth of Sisyphus in philosophy 101 in college. Apparently they don't teach this anymore, right? And you see references to this in current literature, and the people who are reading it don't even know, don't even know about absurdism and existentialism and all that kind of stuff. They don't know how it's different from nihilism and stuff. So if you are in that state where the information that you're getting is not even is all out of context and skewed out of context, plus the AI appearances of deep fakes, just
Yeah,
to
it's a whole nother thing.
yes, a
Yeah.
whole nother level, right?
Yeah.
Then it actually is becomes a very confusing time. But um, I have a suggestion for you, Krishna. I don't know whether or not you've ever tried microdosing ketamine. And
Yes. Well, not
yeah,
sort of. My partner is a ketamine therapist.
yeah.
So she leads ketamine assisted therapy.
Oh, fantastic! In the
Yeah.
see, it's the one is the one I've had ketamine assisted therapy, and it's the one uh, atypical psychedelic that for me where music actually works best. I can't stand the a ketamine therapy without music. And one of the things, as a scientist, you take a look at the action of it as an anesthetic and so on. And if you take a look at the graph, it actually has an hypnagogic phase where you could actually hypnotize the person. So my suggestion to you is, if you can do it, what would be great would be to time the music such that to tell the client, to read out with his own voice, what he would like to hypnotize himself or herself with, right? Words, affirmations, and stuff. And then at a certain point, of the music, etc., it that at the hypnagogic, just timed with the hypnagogic phase, will be those hypnotic suggestions, because that whether or not the
Mhm.
person is hypnotizable, he is at a hypnagogic phase, right?
Right.
And then go after. I've you know I have been waiting to suggest this to someone who actually knows music and
Well,
psychedelics, but
I've been doing something like this actually. Well, actually, what you're saying, but it's not in my ceremony concerts. It's a concert I do that mixes ceremony and guided meditation in a sense, and I'm using the music as a way to guide their brains and their bodies into those receptive states. And then I'm hoping that they can access what they want to choose, what kind of seeds they want to plant in themselves, and I have them write it down, and I have them. The ritual itself is a way of sort of codifying that in their own brains and bodies. So the music is the mechanism by far that is helping them to get into this relaxed, open state. And I made a record called Music for Mushrooms, a soundtrack for the Psychedelic Practitioner, and that's for psilocybin to guide this experience and help amplify it. And I've been
yeah,
considering making one for ketamine because I have an album coming out in next month called Spores that's perfect for ketamine. She's been using it. I've used it. and I'm like, wow, it's a truncated version of the Music for Mushrooms album. It's an hour long. And so I
Mm-hmm.
might now make one that's specifically for ketamine, specifically for therapy, because I agree the music is a very powerful vehicle and has been for thousands of years in any form of ceremony. The music is the central element of ceremony.
Yeah, I developed. I think you know that I developed a pharmawaska method for DMT, right? That doesn't use the actual vine, but uses a reversible liver inhibitor plus the DMT crystals. And so on, and the journey is just as long. It's about 5 or 6 hours, but it's clean because I couldn't take the vomiting. I know it's part of the lore to vomit, but my genes say that, and the reason I've taken it many times and they've always like I was gonna die, and I don't have the proper enzymes to actually take out the liver inhibitor, which is a permanent inhibitor that is in Banisteriopsis caapi. That's why I developed my pharmawaska. My friends call it achawaska. Um, because
Wow.
I've basically considered the dosing, etc. But what I do in my journeys is I just play the Icaro, and I know that you have developed the music for mushroom journeys, right? Uh, I'm a lightweight when it comes to this because I don't have the proper liver enzymes to actually break down psychedelics. So the effects on me of 500 milligrams of psilocybin is equivalent to your 5 grams or 2 grams. It's crazy because I don't have the
Wow.
necessary enzymes to do so, right? But it would be nice to have a specific music just for the mushroom journey.
Yeah, I'll send you a link.
Yeah, that would be great. But even more so, I think, and I'm always thinking also, Krishna, is in terms of the clinical applications, right? We know that psilocybin is being tested right here, city next to me in Baltimore, right? And you helped curate some of their music, I believe, for
Yes, some of those studies have been using my music, and
yeah,
Robin Carhart Harris was on this program, and they've used it. And then I also work
yeah.
with some different organizations. There's a company called Wave Paths that's working on some applications of biofeedback and music for psychedelic science. But there's a lot of this out there now where people are exploring
Yeah,
it. But I did
yeah,
the psilocybin stuff just because no one was doing it.
yeah. It's just odd for me that the one place, the one atypical psychedelic, where actually I need to have a specific kind of music. It's not even in my pharmawaska or in a mushroom journey. It's actually the one that affects me most is in ketamine. I need to have that music sort of like as a guiding thing. Otherwise,
Hmm.
I I get very diffuse, right? In terms of the experience, it's as if in the other places, the music is there, but does not guide the experience. It's like it's the molecule that guides the experience, but for some reason, for me, with ketamine, it's the music that guides my experience rather than the other way around.
Yeah,
So,
well, you're preaching to the choir. So, but it's interesting to hear. I appreciate that. Those two
yeah,
cents. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
No, no. It's just that for people who are actually into for psychonauts who are actually doing this, it's just so you know that in terms of these experiences, there are certain experiences where we know that the set and setting is actually very important, right? But people who have different experiences, for them sometimes the music will be part of the setting, and sometimes the music will be part of the guiding system. And for me, there are certain molecules, as I said, like ketamine, that actually does the guiding in terms of where the experience goes, rather than the other way around. But that's the experience that I have with these things.
Well, Dr. Ted, thank you so much for giving us your time. How can people interact with you in the world or
Yeah,
what's the way?
yeah, I have a website where I created a nootropic, to enhance focus. But what it actually does is it activates your task positive network. So it makes you focus externally for about 3 or 4 hours. The product is called Blue Carnitine, which I created for myself, right? And it's transcriptions.com. It's like prescriptions, but with the TRO. It will turn your tongue blue because it has methylene blue in it. Because I'm not being political here. Blue is the new smart. So that's at transcriptions.com. At Instagram, we're at transcriptions. The parent, that's the brand, and my company is called snhlife.com. We're doing precision dosed cannabis products, meaning we're pharmaceutical grade. We're not a consumer type of product for edibles and stuff, but we do essentially pharmaceutical grade, because majority of us in the group are actually physicians who are doing the formulation. And if you happen to be in Asia, I'm there 30 days every quarter, except during this time of the pandemic. I'm at biobalanceinstitute.com, where I actually started the whole practice of health optimization, medicine, and practice. And the nonprofit here in the US is at homehope.org. That's HOMEHOPE.org, where you could see my effort in trying to move the needle away from disease and into health. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Dr. Ted, for joining us. Wow, that was a lot of information. I'm going to have to listen to that one twice. But it's always wonderful to get into someone else's world and their brain. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. This song you're hearing again in the background, again, is called Always, and that's from the Spores album, sort of a highlights reel of the music for Mushrooms, a soundtrack for the Psychedelic Practitioner album. Spores is available on vinyl at eastforest.org or digitally wherever you listen to music. It comes out in full on digital on October 16th, the new moon. All right, folks, you keep walking your walk. Do say hi. Words of support are always appreciated. Info at eastforest.org or social media. Don't let that rot your brain. Don't take any shit, especially that digital social shit. But if you do, just do it with grace.